again. The other night I talked about variables involved in adult language acquisition and the contrast we have between adult language acquisition and child language acquisition. We've got the internal variable, whatever it is, in the brain, which is apparently a lacking brain for any knowledge of any language, but it's only the potentiality of learning languages for human beings, in addition to very, very limited input. So these two, we said, are necessary but not sufficient to learn at least one language in childhood. However, they found that in adult second language acquisition, the variables are different. We still have the input which we might receive in a national setting. In addition to that, in a national setting, we have all the variables related to the instruction, which we talked all about the details of the variables involved here, like input, method, etc. We talked about individual traits, and we said that it is a question mark whether non-native speakers can achieve native like linguistic knowledge of a second language. But these were all external to the human being. We specifically concentrated on internal variables. The brain of an adult is different with regard to language learning from a child brain, because at least in the mind of an adult language learner, we have at least the knowledge of one language. Regarding the fact that some adults actually have the knowledge of two languages at least. So I showed you an example of variables and how they affect the learning process, for instance, explicit and implicit, focusing on form. We talked last night, and also I gave you an example about monolinguals and bilinguals and how is the task of language learning when somebody has got the knowledge of one language or two languages to learn another new language. So today, for your interest, I want to concentrate on Arabic and see what is the task of learning an Arabic speaker to learn a new language. So I try to be very brief. Well, all of us know that a very simple description of languages about clause structure is that we find that some languages are SVO, that is the subject appears before the verb, and then we have the object. So in this regard, if you get a very simplistic view, in English we say he washes the car, in Arabic we say, excuse me for my pronunciation, Ali yaqsad al-sayyara. I don't know if I'm correct. So apparently it is again SVO. And in Ladana Voiture, French, again excuse me for my French accent. So apparently all three languages are SVO. But of course we understand that it is not the case that English is like French. Because if we negate the same sentences in English and in French, we find that in English we say something like he does not wash the car, in which case the verb appears after the negative element not, whereas in French, il ne lave pas la voiture, the verb actually appears before the negative part. So pas is like not. You see how different they are. So tonight I want to focus on what is the position of subject and the verb, and why in French and English, for instance, if apparently they are both SVO, sometimes the position is different for verbs. And you see that in Arabic, in fact, we don't have this order all the time, SVO. Sometimes we have VSO order, right? So how is it? Now the idea is that in the mind of all human beings, the structure of clauses are the same. So if the structure of the clauses are the same, why in Arabic we have different word orders. Now, let's first concentrate on the English and French example. Well, what happens in French and English when we find that the verb has got different position? If this is a universal structure for all sentences in human languages, in all languages, what we find is that in any language, this is the subject and verb position, of course, where the subject agrees with the verb. For instance, if the subject is third person, the verb also appears in third person. If the subject is plural, the verb would be also plural. Now, what is the difference between English and French? Is due to the fact that verbs in English are always within the verb phrase. They do not change their position to this position, which is the actual position of the verb. Eventually, they should appear here. However, in French, the verb actually raises from the within verb phrase to T position, and that's why in English, not is before the verb, whereas in French, not is after the verb. This is due to this fact. So how is it in Arabic? Can we account for all different structures of Arabic within the same structure? Yes, it is possible. So what happens in Arabic? In Arabic, جمله فعلیه, for instance, we usually say خرج المعلم من الغرفة, right? In which case the verb appears before the subject. What is happening here? The verb, like French, has raised from V position to T position. And that's why the verb appears before. Now, what is here in subject position? Apparently, in Arabic, there is a pronoun here, something like hola, and that's why the verb is always singular and it is masculine as well. And that's why when we have plural subject, in fact, still we use a singular verb in Arabic.
Like even
so
if,
we say,
excuse me, even if the subject is female?
yes, not for gender, but for singular and plural, for number, it's the same. So خرج المعلمون من الغرفة, right? So why is this? Because in Arabic, all these verbs are third person singular because there is a pronoun here. And that's why when Arabic speakers learn, for instance, Persian, when they start to speak Persian, they always use a third person singular pronoun in here. So if you know familiar with Persian, they will say, "Bulek man khodesh kheyli dost daram." So it's something like he loves you. We have two pronouns when they speak Persian. Apparently, this is due to that fact. So, however, if the subject moves to this position, like in al-mu'allim kharaja min al-ghurfa, we do have that agreement between the subject and the verb. So, in al-mu'allimun kharaju this time. You see, all different types of the sentences have got the same structure. Now, what happens if an Arabic speaker wants to learn a new language, English, Persian, whatever? In the mind of the Arabic speaker, they should get rid of this pronoun here. If they do not get rid of this pronoun, they always make mistakes like I just gave you for Persian. In English, you see the situation is not different. That is, the subject always appears in this position, and the verb is here. And now, for instance, in يَعْلَمُ أَنَّ الْمُعَلِّمُ خَرَجَ مِنَ الْغُرْفَةِ أَنَّ الْمُعَلِّمُ خَرَجُوا مِنَ الْغُرْفَةِ. Again, you see the subject is here, so we have agreements between the subject and the verb. And أَنَّهُ خُوَّ here is overt. And that's why we say أَنَّهُ خَرَجَ الْمُعَلِّمَ. And أَنَّهُ, again, that pronoun which is not actually heard here is pronounced here أَنَّهُ خَرَجُ الْمُعَلِّمُ. So although mu'allim and mu'allimun are here in the verb phrase, the pronouns actually agree with the verb. So the point is that the task of an Arabic speaker to learn English is quite different from a French speaker who's learning English, a Persian speaker who's learning English. And this is not the kind of grammar we can teach to our students. So why do we study such grammar? Because as teachers, we should be familiar with the problems that our learners might have. If we do not know what is the task of learning in their mind, we cannot provide them with appropriate tasks. We cannot provide them with appropriate practice in order to learn English. So awareness of the structure of the first language of learners of a second language is very important in order to understand what type of practice, what kind of task should be developed in order to help our learners to improve their second language. That's it for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do you have any questions? Any questions?
Yes, Doctor, thank you very much for the presentation. There's one point that we have to pay attention to, is that when, for example, Arabic speakers learn English, they don't have in their mind the standard Arabic that you just explained. Because Arabic is very complicated, the standard Arabic. For example, how many patterns do we have in English? We can say, Khalid gave a book to Ali, or Khalid gave Ali a book. This is only one pattern, one possible pattern when it comes to the active voice. But in Arabic, there are more than 10 possible ways to say that. For example, Ali a'ta Khalidan kitab. Khalidan, which is the
Yes.
the
The same is in Persian.
I know. Khalidan is indirect object. We can even put it in the beginning.
Yes.
We don't have that in
Yes.
English.
Still, it is in the same way.
Exactly.
We had such a course with Ms. Nava last term.
Yeah.
This is true for German, this is true for Persian, and this is true for Arabic.
Not German.
Yes, the German is the same. Because in German also subject, object, indirect object, oblique object, adverbs, anything can appear at the beginning of the sentence. The same story is found in Arabic, the same story is found in German. And why is that? Because these languages are topic languages. And topic languages, any element actually can move to the beginning of the
There's
sentence.
topic and command.
Yes,
Yes.
it can move to the beginning of the sentence.
Yes.
We do have such possibilities in English as well. The point is that such possibilities in English are never taught in our classrooms.
English is
And
analytical.
our students are not exposed to the input, which is rich enough with such structures. That is one point. Another point is that such structures are not very prominent and frequent in English language. However, they are grammatical. So in English, we say Miss Marker hated her. But it is okay if you say her, Miss Marple hated. This is totally grammatical in English. But such structures are not
Rare. Rare.
actually, they are actually lacking in the input of English. Or it could be something like her, Miss Marple hated, her, Miss Marple hated, for instance, John. This is again grammatical.
That's what
But because such structures are infrequent in English, many language teachers think that such structures are ungrammatical, whereas they are not ungrammatical, they are grammatical. The point is that they are not very frequent. Native speakers actually accept them. Another point is that sometimes we do use them with resumptive pronouns which are repeatedly referring to the same person. For instance, if you have watched Mr. Poirot, he always speaks like this. He's a French speaker apparently. He says the curtains, they are drawn. So the curtain and they both refer to the same entity. It seems that the subject, the sentence has got two subjects. Okay? Once upon a time, structures like this were considered as ungrammatical in English. But nowadays, many native speakers of English also speak like this. That is in the grammar, which is in dictionaries, for instance, like the comprehensive grammar of English, you do not find such structures. But in more recent dictionaries and in the corpus studies of English, we do find native speakers who actually use such structures, sentences with two subjects. And Arabic speakers and Persian speakers actually use a lot of resumptive pronouns in their speech. Once upon a time, according to standard English, this is ungrammatical. But if you speak to native speakers of English, yes, they speak like that. Okay, so it is not considered as ungrammatical.
I mean, the point is that
we call such structures scrambling. Scrambling. Any element can move to the beginning of the sentence, but the clause structure is the
this is
same.
very, very common in Arabic, especially standard Arabic.
Yes, yes,
They're all
and also
standard.
in Persian,
Yes.
also in Persian, and in German.
Thank you very much.
Your pleasure. Any other questions? Thank you very much.